There you go. Take it away.
Thanks, Ruby. And thanks to all the parents that have taken time out on the hottest day of the year to join us this morning. Um, I do appreciate all that you have going on. I'm not sure what stage of the hospital journey you're at, but undoubtedly, like Gracie mentioned, you're probably on autopilot. So the fact that you've actually taken time out this morning is remarkable, and I do appreciate it. So for that reason, do try to make the most of it by maybe having a pen and paper to hand. There will be points where I'll ask you to jot down some practical suggestions that might help you. And yeah, just try to remove distractions for the next 40 minutes or so. We will have a Q&A at the end. So I will ask maybe if you could mute your microphone between now and then, just for the purposes of recording, and then we'll have the Q&A at the end, just for confidentiality reasons. People will probably prefer to ask questions when the camera's off and we're not recording. So just a brief introduction. Ruby's already mentioned that I'm a principal clinical psychologist. At the moment, I'm working with neurodivergent children and children who've experienced developmental trauma in their lives. I'm a mother of three. I haven't had an experience of a child being in hospital for a long period of time, but I do have one with severe allergies. We're in and out for that. One with asthma. I've had a baby in the NICU, and I've also had a child go through surgery. My own father actually had COPD and was in and out of hospital for quite a long period. So I do have some experience of hospital life and what it's like. Um, on the other side, on my professional side, then I've worked in lots of hospitals in the UK and Ireland, mostly in neurology, neurosurgery, neuropsychology in King's College Hospital, in the UK, in London, and the Maudsley, Beaumont, St. Patrick's Mental Health Hospital, where I would have seen inpatients more for psychiatric or mental health reasons. And then I did work for a brief period in Crumlin Hospital, where I was working with young people with eating disorders. Then, once I qualified, I've been working with children with physical disabilities for about 13 of those 15 years. So I would have seen children that had multiple hospital admissions and periods of time in hospital, children with spina bifida, muscular dystrophy, cerebral palsy, children with cancer, those that needed spinal surgery, children with epilepsy that needed ICU admission. So I have worked closely with families that are going through similar experiences to yours. But as Gracie mentioned earlier, every person has their very unique experience of hospital life. The reason you're there, how you cope with it psychologically yourself, the support systems that you have in place, everyone is very different. Um, so for that reason, I did try to make this, like, mental health is huge. It encompasses so much, and to be able to do it justice in an hour it's a tall order. So but I've done my best. I've gathered information. Like, yes, I feel I'm, good at suggesting the evidence-based psychological strategies and advice, but I don't have that in-depth lived experience that Gracie has and other parents like yourselves. So I did make it my business to get that as much as I could. And I did email and call parents who've been through the hospital journey. I spoke to parents of children with FND, with eating disorders, scoliosis, ARFID, cerebral palsy, and a few more. I did take on board all the questions that you submitted to Ruby. There was 30 something. Thank you for those. It was really interesting actually. They all clumped in around four or five similar themes, which I've covered in the workshop. I took on board information booklets from other hospitals in other countries, the vast amount of information that's on the Children's in Hospital website and their resources, such an impressive website. Um, and then I looked at the research evidence, at what does actually in the research, what does support parents' mental health in hospital. And then my own clinical experience informs the workshop today as well. So from all that information that I gathered, there's a lot of kind of core themes, as I mentioned, and that's what I'm covering today. So why is this experience so difficult? What is it about it? And there was a part of that was driven by parents kind of nearly feeling, no, I'm fine. I can get through this. I've managed this, that, and the other. I'm fine. I can, and but then realizing actually, no, this is actually really hard. So I want to speak to that. I think a key in addressing your mental health is understanding why it's deteriorating in the first place. Then, as Gracie mentioned, like all that, those kind of fluffier ideas of self-care kind of fall by the wayside and you really go back to basics. So I'll do that. I'll talk about basic needs and practical supports that can help. Supporting siblings and advocating for your child. These were two things that parents felt that if they had more support with that, they might have felt better in themselves. And then we move on to the more evidence-based psychological coping strategies, like what are the practical things that I can turn to quickly in that moment of real distress when my brain is in autopilot and it can't think straight. So yeah, I've kind of mentioned this already. So just to bear in mind, mental health, to say that I'm going to resolve your mental health challenges in this brief workshop is, it won't be possible, but it is very much a good starting point. And there's a number of small changes that you will be able to make that will make a difference to your mental health after this workshop. Um, mental health, like there's no singular trigger for when it deteriorates and there's no singular solution. There's multiple factors involved, which we'll go on to talk about. We need to focus on what is within our control because there is so much that isn't. And so while I can't promise to resolve, your mental health challenges, I can promise that this does give you time to step out of autopilot mode and actually think, right, what practically can I do right now to support myself? What priorities maybe do I need to shift around or change? For example, as Gracie mentioned, do I need to consider planning to the return to work so I can get that sense of identity back in myself again and feel better about myself? What can I do to receive maybe some mutual support? I want you to feel validated and seen in the experience that you're having, because that is the first step actually to improving your mental health is when you feel seen, heard, and understood as a person. And then I do want to provide you with some easy to use psychology tools. So the first theme is a lot of parents felt quite and still do feel quite unseen in their distress. They feel that everyone's checking in around the child. You become the mother of someone who's unwell. Your mental health just isn't a priority really anymore, even though, um, as we know from the psychological research, put on your own life jacket first. Your nervous system is actually essential in helping your child's nervous system to cope with the hospital setting. I had many parents say, oh, does it really impact on my mental health? Should I just be getting on with it? What's wrong with me? Am I weak? Am I not coping? And then, as I said, many parents felt that the attention was mostly on the child without people even acknowledging maybe the parent in all of this. So, as we've mentioned, like, and it's not just anecdotal, it is factual, research-based evidence that having a child in hospital for a prolonged time is one of the most stressful life experiences that a parent can face. It's up there with divorce, moving house, and the death of a loved one. And why? Because of the huge amount of anxiety, the fear, the uncertainty about what lies ahead every hour, not to mind, depending on your child's condition, you're constantly, so that if you think about it as parents, we're hardwired. Like one of our main instincts and drives biologically, psychologically, is to protect that child. We see it even in animals, if you approach a dog who's just had puppies, she can become very aggressive and protective. So we have fear circuits that are just activated and kind of don't switch off, or they keep going, like they're highly active when our child is under threat, which is how we experience it when they're in hospital. We also then have the added issue of our sleep being disrupted and exhaustion, which makes those fear centers extra sensitive. So we're like operating, if you want to imagine your nervous system as being, green is calm and regulated, maybe orange is you're stressed out, and red is like your autopilot, you're just on high alert all of the time. when you're tired, you're always kind of in the orange zone. And parents in hospital are always in that orange zone and teetering on going into the red. And it doesn't take very much to put you into the red. Um, then we have the constant worry. And because, it's such a vicious circle, you often find yourself on your own, waiting around. So there's more time to ruminate. There's more time to get caught up in your thoughts and to look up Dr. Google and get yourself into a frenzy maybe about the future. And then, of course, there's disruption to like all the systems that typically support us, family, work, and finances. So in the literature, it's described as a family crisis because it is potentially, as Gracie said, a traumatic event, because we've multiple stressors happening all at the same time. So we've mentioned earlier that it can be described as a traumatic incident, and many parents, in fact, 1 in 3, after a prolonged stay in hospital, will describe experiencing post-traumatic stress symptoms. They can show up in lots of different ways. We might have intrusive memories, we might have nightmares, dreams, sleep disturbances, very strong emotional reactions to certain triggers, such as the smell of hospital. Even the smell of hospital dinners can make us feel sick. You might feel very on edge, irritable, difficulty concentrating, difficulty planning ahead. So not one of these symptoms, like, but lots of these together could indicate that you are having that post-traumatic experience. So the key message, I suppose, is that if you are feeling overwhelmed, it's a normal response to an extraordinary stressful situation. It's not a sign that you're coping badly. It's a sign that your nervous system is responding, I suppose, how it should, given that your child is in such a state of threat. And I suppose it's my job, and then it's the support systems around you, it's their job to help support you to still function in that state of stress, because it is very difficult. Um, and the first step, as I mentioned, is understanding. So, like, what is mental health? Where do I even start with trying to support my mental health? As a psychologist, I often get like criticized, maybe like it's such a woolly subject. Like, where do you start? Where does it start and end? It's so subjective. And my aim always in doing parent workshops is to break it down into practical steps and something visual that you can see, understand, and take home with. Because anything else you just won't remember, given the stress state that you're quite often in. Um, so just like, if you have a bacterial illness, for example, the doctor needs to identify what bacteria it is before he can give you the appropriate antibiotic. And with mental health, we need to identify what are the specific triggers that you need to target in order to see an improvement. So so as I mentioned earlier, mental health isn't just one thing. There's multiple things going on. And what it is it's a combination of biological or physical factors, social factors, and the psychological factors that are at play. Um, so the I love this model because it provides you with a really practical visual way of addressing and different areas of your well-being. And even myself, like postnatally, I mentioned that I had a child in the NICU, and I did experience a period myself of heightened postnatal anxiety. And I remember actually drawing out these 3 circles and putting into each of them what I could do to help myself. And gradually, over time, by addressing a few different things in each of these areas, I did notice a difference. Um, so I suppose this is a time, if you have a pen and paper to write down a few notes here, that would be a good time to do it, because we're just going to have a think about what are the physical, the psychological, and the social factors that are contributing to your mental health distress at the moment, and then what can we do about them? So in terms of the physical factors, right, as Gracie mentioned earlier as well, we're all born differently with our own unique bandwidth for stress, I suppose. Some people have a greater tolerance for stress than others, just the temperament, how we come into the world. Some people have what we call a larger window of tolerance and they can cope with larger amounts of stress. Others have a smaller window. So there's not a huge amount that you can do about that, but there's certainly lots of other things you can change. So sleep deprivation is something that contributes to the mental health of parents in hospital. Um, Diet, often you're living on hospital food, you don't have access to a wide range of nutritious food. Hydration can be impacted, and considering that our brains are like 70 to 80% water, they can't function at their best if they're dehydrated. Our physical exercise is very limited. Um, we may have underlying illnesses ourselves, and we're more susceptible to illness as well when we're in hospitals. We might have sensory sensitivities to noise and bright lights that we have in the hospital. Um, Parents, may have, if you're perimenopausal or menopausal, that's playing a part as well. And as we mentioned earlier, we can be in constant fight or flight mode, which means our adrenaline and cortisol are surging, and it's very difficult to think straight and logically, and we're constantly seeing the world with our stress goggles on and interpreting everything through that stressed lens. Um, Sorry. It's just very warm in here today. Um, so the psychological factors then are the uncertainty, the lack of predictability, which equates then to a lack of safety. And as human beings, one of the core things that will determine our feeling good and feeling well in ourselves is a sense of safety. We need to feel safe in order to feel psychologically well in ourselves. We may be developing some irrational beliefs about our child's illness. We might be catastrophizing a lot. So many parents, I'd be one, uh, our thinking style is more, we might be more of an anxious predisposition, and we might tend to imagine the worst. So that's what you call catastrophizing. And because we are, in a threatened state a lot of the time, we're interpreting a lot through a lens of threat. So even you might find yourself in hospital, you're looking at the news, and stuff that you previously mightn't have found that threatening or scary suddenly seems very alarming and very worrying, and it's getting in on you a bit more. And it's because you're in that fight or flight mode. The mental load of being a parent in hospital, just from talking to parents, is just extraordinary, really. It's just enormous. And you're trying to manage that mental load whilst stuck in a hospital. So you're thinking about the sibling, your partner, you're thinking about your work, your colleagues, you're thinking about the friendships that you're not able to attend to, all of that. There's a huge loss of autonomy and control. And Gracie described that very well when she said that, from that day when she discovered that her child needed that tracheostomy, bam, that's when she felt she kind of lost control over her own life. Um, then there was that loss of role that comes alongside that, and the huge guilt that you feel about an awful lot of different things. The loneliness that you feel, and then feeling unseen. And then finally, the social kind of or more cultural factors that families felt impact on their mental health is the limited support, the relationship challenges that you experience, your unmet social needs, the limited social contact that you have, that pressure to be able to work and manage it all, which is part of our kind of individualistic kind of, uh, status maybe driven society sometimes, is that we're supposed to be able to be the working mother and the mother in hospital and the mother to the sibling and parent, should I say, not just mother. Um, and then the hospital culture as well is quite stressy at the best of times. Not always, but there is that kind of cultural pressure of a lack of resources, maybe limited staff, depending on what hospital you're in. And then the way care is divided up into, cardiology, pulmonary, and so on. And often you're trying to piece all of that together, and you end up sometimes being the person that's trying to do that. Um, so what I will ask, if you do have a pen and paper, please do take it out, because what we're going to do is these were all the factors that impact on our mental health, but equally, just as you can take away and cause distress within each of these areas, you can give back to each of these areas and support yourself. So what can help? So I have spoken to as I mentioned, many parents, and I've taken on board the evidence and my own professional experience. So parents have said that practical things can and do make a real difference to their mental health. It's not always the fluffy self-care packages, it's actually food, it's deliveries, it's someone doing their shopping, it's someone saying that they'll collect the sibling from hurling. Um, one parent said you need to focus on what you can control because so much you can't. And I remember that parent saying that at the end of the day, if they felt they did their best at what they could control in that moment, they can't do anymore. And it's hard to know where to start sometimes, is what one parent said. And then that's why I think it is so important to start, if you're worried about your mental health, you need to start at the bottom of this hierarchy of needs. Because if you don't have enough food, water, sleep, basic other survival needs, you cannot expect to be in a position to manage those challenging thoughts that you have. You need to give your body the best chance that you can at managing the stress that's within your system. So the basics. So again, this is a combination of ideas from parents and hospitals and the evidence. So can you take a multivitamin? Start with something as basic as that. Vitamin B and magnesium are particularly good when you're very stressed. Some hospitals have lists of places that will deliver healthy food. One parent mentioned Sprout, I think, was a restaurant that delivered nice, healthy, nutritious meals. Can you prepare your own meals ahead of, that was a tip that one parent gave me, was that she used to prepare her meals at the weekend before a week in hospital and store them in the parents' kitchen. And check in if there's space in the freezer there. And most parents' kitchens will have a microwave, so that opens up the chance of you heating up your meals. In the parents' accommodation in Crumlin, apparently there's an air fryer and a hob, and maybe just check in with your clinical nurse manager as to what you can use or not use when it comes to feeding yourself as best you can. Bringing in a refillable bottle and a refillable coffee cup were other tips that were given to me. Sleep is obviously, so challenging. I had this myself. Trying to sleep on a hospital ward is very difficult. Can you take turns with your partner using earplugs, sleeping aids, so over-the-counter sleep aids? So obviously I'm not a GP. I'm not going to make definite recommendations on that. But what I will say is that for me anyway, personally, sleep is such a priority that I would consider maybe going to the GP or going to seek advice on what I could or could not take, maybe to promote my sleep if I was really struggling with it. Using earpods with white noise is something that a parent found helpful with all the beeps and whatnot in hospital. And then on the Children in Hospital website, there's lots of information about on and off-site parent accommodation. Basic things such as showering. Apparently in Crumlin, not a lot of parents know this unless they kind of seek out the information, but you can use the shower in the parents' accommodation. And I did see somewhere the Children in Hospital now, they're adding kind of new lovely toiletries, I think, to the toiletries that are available to parents. But do ask, because often hospitals are so busy that unless you ask for these things, you might not just be given them necessarily. Some parents mentioned that they needed to feel safe. Maybe this was just, I suppose you never can control who's on the ward with you. So if you do feel unsafe around a particular family in the hospital, maybe to mention that, because it is key that you do need to feel safe in the hospital setting. So what movement can you get? So can you go, it is really key. It boosts your feel good hormones like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, all those endorphins, those feel good chemicals will be boosted if you can get little bits of movement in throughout the day. Can you ask a volunteer or relative to stay with your child? Those stretches do release, they have been shown to release or help the promotion, of serotonin in your body and other feel good chemicals. Taking the stairs, chair stretches. One parent would bring in a massage ball for her shoulders because they get very sore just from the constant tension, and a yoga mat that you could maybe use in the hospital room. Many parents that I've worked with, especially kids with physical disabilities who be in and out of, I'm just thinking of one parent who was in and out of A&E quite a lot with seizures. And that parent said that medication for them, so mental health medication was a game changer for them, because what she found was that she was just constantly irritable with her other children, and that it just took the edge off that actually. So it is something to think about. Um, then other practical comforts, to think about are like the seating arrangement, the ventilation. And look, there's only so much of these things you can control, but what can you do? Maybe there is small things you can do to try to control or change some of these. Something important that a few parents mentioned was, trying to avoid staying on the screen on your phone all of the time, and to bring in other things like books, jigsaws, diaries, and so on, because they found themselves doom scrolling or using Dr. Google. Um, and one parent actually used to leave the phone in the drawer for a certain amount of time during the day. So Ruby has mentioned financial supports. I don't need to, but it's interesting though, because she did mention that this is a very utilized service and people do come to this to look for information. And the reason being, again, it comes back to that psychological safety. If you feel as a parent that you're financially unstable and that threat to provide for your family is there, that will kick off a stress response. And that's why it is important to your mental health. Um, so I won't go on about this because it is on the Children in Hospital website, who you can talk to, the government supports and the charity supports that are available. And again, on the Children in Hospital information website, there's more. And again, all of these factors, I know I'm a psychologist and it might seem unusual me talking about all these practical things, but they are, as I showed you in that hierarchy of needs, they are essential building blocks to supporting your mental health in the long term. So all of these, there's information on all of these factors uh, on the website, sorry. In particular, the Kids Hub is really useful actually. There's social stories. I got lost in there one day looking at the resources on preparing for scans, tests, what to bring, operations. And do you know what happens? Like, and I know myself, when you're in that fight or flight mode, you don't even think to look on a website. You just, that reflective capacity that's controlled by the front part of our brain is hijacked by cortisol and adrenaline. And that's why taking time out to attend or listen to a workshop like this is actually really important, because you go, oh my God, yeah, why didn't I think of like ordering from a takeaway, or why didn't I think of asking that neighbor to collect John from hurling or whatever? Um, so yeah, so that's the basics, the foundation building blocks really to your mental health. Um, then the area that I'm kind of most familiar with and where I can support parents with and have supported parents in my work with kids with physical disabilities, um, the psychological factors. So things that create a sense of safety would include like clear communication from staff where possible, and just going out of your way to try to receive regular updates, clear explanations, and getting opportunities for questions. It doesn't always happen, but from parents, I have heard that when there is a consistent care team, like you gave the example, Gracie, of that consultant for the last, 10 years, it really does, like that familiarity, the predictability, the trust really creates a sense of well-being, and confidence. Having reliable routines where possible, um, knowing where to access information is can really help your mental health, and being involved in your child's care. Now that's all well and good, but how do you go about all this? So, sorry, one sec. So the first thing actually, sorry, I want to address is, parents often tell me that they can't help it, that they find it really hard not to engage in this catastrophic kind of thinking or imagining the worst, or um, just anxious thinking, which is very understandable. So just, I mean, I could write a whole session on this, but just some very quick tips, I guess. Trying to separate the facts from fears. So what is a fact here versus what is something I'm just worried about? So what do I know for certain versus what am I assuming or imagining? That step in itself can actually be very helpful. Looking for the evidence. So is this thought based on a fact or a worry? can I clarify my worry by actually asking someone, is my worry valid? Um, Trying to bring it back to the now. So this is something I do all the time. Like even, as a stressed out parent, your head, you've got 10 million tabs open and you're trying to figure out which one is important. And just even this little catchphrase like win. So what is important now? So right now, I need to focus on talking to a doctor about that spike in temperature that I've noticed, and then kind of trying to park all the other things for later. So lots of parents will experience intrusive thoughts like unwanted or distressing thoughts or images. Um, so some helpful tips, and this is something I had to do myself in that postnatal period, was to kind of try to separate myself from the thought, because what happens is that the thought kind of takes you over and you become the thought almost. Um, so trying to think of a thought. So let's say, so my uh, daughter, her lung collapsed when she was born. And one of the thoughts that I was having was, oh my God, she's going to have lung problems for the rest of her life. So rather than like getting, going on a train ride with that thought, I would try to stop it and go, okay, I am having the thought that my daughter might have to have lung support for the rest of her life. Or even I used to write down some of the irrational thoughts. And then you'd look back on the post-it note the next day and you'd kind of realize, wow, that was pretty irrational. But it's understandable given the stress that you're in. But just taking a moment to try and like write it out, say it out, draw it out, whatever it might be, can be very helpful. Talking to someone, and as we mentioned earlier, you're talking to somebody who actually gets it is very, very helpful. So it doesn't always have to be like a psychologist or a therapist. Sometimes like just knowing and feeling that someone gets you is hugely supportive. So these are evidence-based ways to reset your nervous system if you're in one of those panic states. So deep breathing, I know it's like the cliche, but it does actually work, and there's evidence behind it because it activates your calm down vagus nerve. Um, Inhaling for four, holding for four, and sometimes they say actually exhaling for a bit longer, because when we breathe for a long period of time, it just triggers that our body is in a calm state, because when our body goes into a stress state, one of the first things to change is our breathing. So if we can slow down our breathing, it will tell our body that things are safe. That's the very quick science behind that. Um, so grounding, this is something I use regularly. So if I am, going on a train ride with my thoughts all over the world, I will try to bring myself back to the now and just notice something that I can hear, that I can see, that I can smell. It doesn't have to be five things. To be honest, by thing number two or three, you find yourself coming back into the moment. Um, Muscular relaxations of tensing and then releasing your muscles from toe to head can start off a calming response. Visualization, I do find this very difficult myself, especially if I'm in a high stress situation, but some people do. It does help them, especially if they do with some music. Mantras can be very soothing because they're rhythmic, they're regular, they're repetitive, and all those factors do cause or help to cause, should I say, a calming impact on your nervous system. Movement, I can't stress how important that is. Cold water, just splashing your face in the bathroom, does release feel-good chemicals. Hand massage, humming or singing, that engages the vagus nerve. Um, and then even just drinking slowly a glass of water, it helps you to regulate or slow down your breathing, which, as I mentioned, tells your body that it's calm. So that is such a whistle stop kind of version of these. But if you do have time, and if one or two of those speak to you, do look up kind of more information on those. Sorry, I'm quite mindful of time, but I'll keep going. Communicating and advocating, parents do say that it helps to improve their mental health. Why? Because it increases, like if you're able to get information that's accurate, you increase that sense of predictability, you improve your understanding of your child's condition, You're helping to build kind of supportive relationships. You're feeling a bit more heard, and you're reducing that burden of not knowing what's happening next. But advocating and communicating is easier said than done. And a few parents actually said that it has helped them to keep kind of a hospital notebook. And I think that's on the children's children in hospital website too. So questions that you have that you might forget in the heat of those 5 sacred moments that you have with the consultant, writing down the test results because multiple professionals might ask you what they were, and you might forget them. Um, make a note of medication changes. Just even if you don't need the information, parents have said that just knowing what's happening gives their nervous system a sense of calm and stability. Asking key questions like what's happening next, when will we get an update, and this is one that I've used myself in hospital actually, just because I one particular consultant who obviously he was very familiar with the information he was giving me. I wasn't, I was a total novice, and I would actually say, okay, so do I have this right? This, and this. And then he'd either correct me or not. Um, and not being afraid to share observations and to trust that gut instinct that you have in relation to your own child. So a useful framework that they use to help parents to advocate is the ASSERT framework. So that first step, actually, I know myself from being a healthcare professional that it is so you really I really do listen to a parent, rightly or wrongly, but I do tend to tune in a bit more when they acknowledge that, this might be the 70th phone call. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but that this could be the 15th stressful phone call that you've received that day. And if a parent says, look, I know you're busy, it's like, oh, wow, she actually sees where I'm at. And then I'm more inclined to meet them where they're at as well. So that it can be helpful just to acknowledge the other person where they're at, but then to move on to where you're at. So I am concerned that my child's pain has not been adequately managed. What do you want done about that? So can we review, be specific about what you'd like, express it clearly and as honestly as you can. I'm feeling worried. So you're not imparting blame here. You're not being defensive. You're not attacking. You're just saying, I am worried because my child looks quite distressed. And then being clear about the request that you're making. Can we please arrange for the consultant to discuss this, sorry. And then just being thankful for their time. There are on the Children's in Hospital website, sorry, there is nice resources about patient advocacy service if you do really feel that you're at the point where you feel like you maybe need to make a formal complaint about any aspect of care, or if you just want more information really on what your rights are within that hospital setting. Because again, this all has an impact on our mental health. And then the final thing that we come to are the social or the relational factors that can impact on our mental health. So, as we said, we can find ourselves with very limited support, relationship challenges with your child and with your child in hospital and with their siblings, your unmet social needs, the limited social contact that you might have with families because you're constantly away from them, and then that pressure to manage it all. So what is in our control? So there are things that you can do to help your relationship with your child. So this was, I spoke to a parent of a child who had been in hospital with a severe eating challenges over the years. And the child felt very much like they were being forced to stay in hospital and maybe were quite blaming towards their parent. And it's often, it's so hard to realize this in the moment or to reframe it in the moment, but it is often a sign of distress and not a statement of truth. So then children can say all sorts of hurtful things. How dare you leave me here? How, all sorts. And it's hard, as I say to parents, try not to take the bait and to see the hurt and the distress and maybe the pain, the physical pain that's underneath that statement. And of course, children will always, as we do, direct anger and fear towards the ones they love the most and that they trust the most. And also, we know ourselves, if we're in pain and if we're hungry, that emotion part of our brain is much more easily destabilized we'll release cortisol, we'll release adrenaline, and we'll act from autopilot and say and do things that are hurtful towards others. So children in pain and discomfort will give out, not necessarily, you know, what they're saying isn't factual, it's just more a symptom maybe of pain or illness. So it's important to kind of, hear what they're saying and validate it. So yes, I can see you're really upset and that you're angry about being here. Um, Avoiding kind of arguing in the moment because they are in a state of like heightened stress, and really they're not going to, you won't be able to logically engage with them. So you're not going to have a rational conversation in that moment. So trying to convince them, to see things differently isn't going to help. So as I say, you know, uh, more movement, so more hugging, maybe more rubbing of their arm or whatever it might be, and less talk. So less words, more actions is more beneficial for your child if they're very distressed. And then just providing reassurance. So I know this is hard and I am here with you and we will get through it. So trying to separate feelings from facts. So yes, I understand that you feel angry with me. I get it. However, two things can be true. Like, um, I understand you feel angry, but I am here because I care about you. Um, so you can hear their anger, but you can also remind them in that same moment that you're here because you care about them. So remind yourself, I think, in the first instance, that healthcare decisions are not easy. Sometimes they're not optional, and they are an act of care and not abandonment. Um, and rather than trying to fix or suppress or get rid of your child's angry feelings, just trying to be with them there and containing them sometimes is the best option. So sharing caregiving responsibilities as well, because it is exceptionally difficult to constantly be the container for a child's distressing feelings. It's just your capacity cup only goes up so far. So you do need, where possible, to share that responsibility with someone else. So yeah, as I said, seeking support where possible rather than carrying this on your own. Um, some helpful things to say to yourself. Again, this is a combination of my own thoughts and those of parents. So my child's distress is real, but their blame does not mean I've done something wrong. And I can be a caring parent even when my child is angry with me. And I made the best decision with the information that I had. And, as I always say, children don't need parents who can, prevent all distress. That's not possible. Life is hard. Life is stressful. It's an inevitability. But what we can do is to try to tolerate or manage their stress as best we can and help them through it. Um, Again, parents felt that their mental health was much better supported if they got help with managing the siblings' mental health and well-being at home. So some parents said that they felt like they were being pulled between two sets of children, an emotional tug of war. And some parents worried about, is this going to have a long-term consequence on the other sibling? So some quick tips, I guess, for sibling support is trying to maintain predictable contact with them. So having maybe a set time every day where you have a call with them, send them a voice note. Can you write them a note, leave it in their lunchbox? Having dedicated sibling time. And actually, the research will say that you're much better off kind of having short, focused one-to-one time consistently rather than, a big long weekend away once every 6 months. Now, you do what you can do with the time you have, but just don't feel guilty if you feel like, oh, I can only manage like 10 minutes Monday and Wednesday, because actually that predictability and the quality of that is actually just as effective, if not sometimes more effective than longer periods of time. It has helped apparently to give the siblings a meaningful role. So it reduces their exclusion from the whole thing. So, for example, can they make some buns or something to bring into the child? Can they make them a card? They be the one responsible for making a daily call to the child in hospital? Making matching bracelets, things like that, give them a meaningful role. Helping them to understand what's happening in an age appropriate way rather than withholding everything is usually the best way forward. Because what we see happen is that when you don't tell a child or a sibling what's happening to the other child in hospital is that their imagined scenario is actually often worse than the reality. So it can help to give them age appropriate information about what's happening, so that they have a narrative to think about and to process the information with. Trying to maintain familiar, or sorry, protect familiar routines is important. It brings that sense of safety and stability to the child. So having someone to help out with their hobbies, and trying to maintain a family tradition, maybe of you go out for pizza the day that school finishes, trying where possible to maintain those little family traditions can mean a lot. Um, can you kind of create a little sibling support team? Like, is there a relative or a friend that can do the GAA run? Let the teachers know. Um, Ask the teacher to maybe send you an email once a week saying, Tom was actually seemed fine this week, totally himself, or no, Tom seemed a bit withdrawn, or whatever the case may be. Again, it just might reduce your sense of responsibility and constantly that mental load of, is he okay in school? Is he not? At least you can tick that off if you have a teacher or an SNA or someone looking out for him. Allow permission for mixed feelings. It is okay to feel jealous about your sibling getting a lot of attention. That is a perfectly normal experience for a sibling to have, because a child's, I suppose, one of their main drives is attachment to the parent, and they will do whatever they need to maintain that close attachment so that they survive. And sometimes that brings about jealousy if they see that you're with another child a lot more. So it's okay to feel jealous, it's okay to feel angry, it's okay to feel frustrated and lonely. It's what you do with those emotions that matters most. So trying to find helpful outlets for those feelings, and maybe you need um, someone outside of the family to support them with those emotions. It depends on the circumstance. As I said, having tangible reminders of their siblings, so photos, matching bracelets. Kids need tangible items sometimes to remind them that, that sibling is okay, they're being cared for, they're still in their life, and they still have a connection with them. Um, and trying to protect special events. Yeah. So one parent mentioned to me that it can be incredibly difficult in hospital on your birthday or on the child's birthday, that it's like it kind of reignites the trauma, really, or the upset of just being there. So just to be very mindful of yourself on those days, and maybe trying to do something extra special that day if you can. Um, yeah, so this is just I suppose the research will say that being able to support a sibling means that it reduces your own guilt. It can reduce your sense of control over the situation. It's been shown to reduce or decrease behavioral challenges, then reduce family conflict, and you feel that you're doing the best you can. So some sibling supports then are on the Children in Hospital Information Hub, where they talk about supporting siblings while preparing for hospital, supporting siblings while at the hospital, siblings activities and supports, and then sibling grief and bereavement supports. And there are several camps. And actually, one of the parents I spoke to said that the Barrettstown sibling camp was one of the best experiences she's ever had, while for that sibling, while her child has been in and out of hospital for the last number of years. So finally, we're nearly there. Other social supports, as we mentioned earlier, that mutual support that you get from another parent who's been through the same thing is invaluable. I know myself from, as I mentioned, going through a really intense experience of postnatal anxiety. The best support I got was from a mother who wasn't a psychologist, she wasn't a counselor, but she had been through this postnatal anxiety herself and had come out the other side. And I just believed and trusted what she had to say, I suppose. And there's just something very unique about the support that you get from other parents that know what you're talking about and truly get it on an emotional level. As we mentioned earlier as well, Gracie, I think you said that the online supports that you've been able to access while in Donegal have been a lifesaver and a game changer for you. And you've met people that you never thought you'd meet, and that would have been impossible to meet had it not been for these in online supports. Um, another parent mentioned to me the possibility of, she said she'd love if the coffee shops that close in the evening in the hospitals, why can't they just open up for an hour for a mutual kind of informal parent support group? So I thought it was a fantastic idea. Then there's obviously the amazing volunteers from CIH that are help around the hospitals, the hospital staff, and a lot of parents said that it's quite often the staff that are giving meals to their children, maybe security staff, like that they see regularly that they feel they can really open up to more because they feel that they're very just non-judgmental, I suppose, and they're not. Sometimes parents are worried or to say that they feel stressed because they're worried about what the professional might think about their capacity to cope. And they felt more able to talk to other non-allied health professionals, if you know what I mean. And then another point that parents said is they need to like, so they were really down on themselves about being, I'm such a bad friend. I don't even have the headspace to talk to that friend or call her, and she's going to think I'm this, that, and the other. But like to really, I mean, this is a very unique, stressful family crisis type situation. And I am sure that any friend worth their salt would not expect you to be making regular contact. So just to check in on the expectations that you have for yourself and are they realistic? Um, because that, like knowing that you don't have to meet these expectations and not putting yourself under pressure can really help reduce your stress levels overall. Um, and then, yeah, there is a lot of hope that, so if you are to address even, so those three circles, the physical factors, the social factors, and the psychological factors, if you were to do just one or two practical things within each of those areas over the next month, it's not just me saying it, there is evidence, there's a lot of studies that have shown, and parents have told me as well anecdotally, that when you do these small little changes and make those small changes, that they do reduce anxiety and stress over time. And that's like what I mean there. That means a meta-analysis is so there's 32 studies so there's probably hundreds of parents involved in that. So it's a lot of parents basically saying that if they did certain things, that yes, they did help. So it's not just lip service, really, I suppose. These things do help, but it does take time, like you've taken today, to reflect on what needs to change and then to action those, I suppose, is the next hard step. But actively advocating and becoming more involved in their child's care where possible has helped. Family focused and sibling support has helped. And then addressing basic needs and using psychological coping tools, such as the ones I've mentioned today, have also been shown to help. So the key message being, I suppose, that whilst we cannot change maybe our child's illness, but with the right supports, you can feel more informed, more confident, more in control, better able to cope. And as a result, your mental health should experience some changes over time. So thank you so much for your time, given the pressure that you all are under time and given that it's the hottest day of the year. And I'll hand over to Ruby, who I think is going to ask for some questions if you have any.